Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy folks, and welcome to this video where we're going to take a little peek at a Reddit post I somehow stumbled across. I don't spend a whole lot of time on Reddit, so I don't actually know how the heck I ended up there. But when I got there and read the question that this Redditor posted, I thought that's actually a very interesting question. And then as I started reading through the responses, it wasn't just, rage and stupid posts. People actually had some really interesting things to say. And so I thought we would take a look at the question, the answers, throw in my own 2 bits, and then, of course, give you time to put in your comments and thoughts down below. So let's take a look at it. We're not going to be able to go through the whole thing because it's a pretty long post, but we'll take the first 10-15 minutes or so of it, and then we'll pick up the rest next time. And what the Redditor asked was, how is it possible that one-page rules has not overtaken Warhammer? Interesting question, slight bias to it, but still, it does ask a good question because a lot of other independent war games have not had nearly the kind of explosion in such a short time that one-page rules did. Sure, one-page rules has been relatively obscure for about a decade, but then suddenly, in the past couple years, it has absolutely exploded. In fact, when I joined it, I think 2 years ago, to join the Patreon, they had just celebrated their 10,000th Patreon subscriber. And to me, for every one Patreon subscriber, there's probably 2, 3, 4, maybe as many as 5 people who play the game but don't subscribe, which means that you have a pretty big community in a fairly small amount of time. So let's take a look at the original post, the questions, and we're just going to go straight through the comments and seeing what people have to say and answer, and we'll take a look and I'll offer my own commentary there or there. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so here we are at the original post, and the question, I didn't quite get it right, but pretty darn close. How has this game not taken over the tabletop world? Now, the post was made only about a year ago, so at that point, one-page rules had definitely found its stride. So this is someone who obviously discovered it more recently, but what they said underneath there, been playing it and loving it. Free rules, model agnostic, balanced game. How has this not dethroned Warhammer? It's objectively better in every single way, or are people not just not seeing it? So he asks a valid question. There's some parts of his question I think are a little bit shaky. For example, it's objectively better. Well, what are his criteria for objective? He mentions free rules, model agnostic, balanced. Free rules, yeah, there's no arguing that. People would rather have a free rule set versus not. Model agnostic, there are positives and negatives to that. And balanced, while I definitely think one-page rules is more balanced than Warhammer 40k, I don't think you ever can create a perfectly balanced game. But valid question. If this game has all these wonderful things, why hasn't it taken over the tabletop world? Let's see what people have to say. So the top response was from this gentleman here, and he brings up that first question. Objectivity does not mean subjectively better, and the latter is often way more important than the first. People will be drawn to certain games. I get that. I have played some games that had a really solid core rule set, but for some reason, the aesthetic, the setting, the minis, the scale just didn't do it for me. So it's possible that that could be why OPR isn't as big as it could be. Then again, at the same time, you look how big Warhammer is, and OPR was meant to be a direct competitor and knockoff to Warhammer, so I don't think that's the problem here. Now, he does mention next that OPR had a relatively long phase of unpredictable updates when the game was more or less in a completely fluid state and anything could change at any point, which left a bad taste in many people. So again, I didn't find one-page rules until, I don't know, maybe about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I'd heard of it earlier than that, but never played it because there was nobody else around me who had even heard of it, let alone was interested in playing it. So in its early days, I could definitely see that. If it's too wishy-washy, if it's not pinned down, that's not going to attract a lot of people. But that's no longer a problem. I mean, OPR has very set rules. It has a nice release schedule in terms of rules updates and changing things. It's not too frequent, but it's not years apart. Carrying on, he says, OPR is also very simple and reductive, which makes a lot of stuff seem the same, because certain 1+ modifiers that make armies in other war games different do not exist due to the affected stats not being a thing in one-page rules. Now, to one degree, I definitely think he's right here. It is simpler, And that does turn some people off. Some people really like the crunch of a game where you spend 5 or 10 minutes, you roll the dice, and then you have to compare this and look this up and calculate this and determine if Saturn is in ascendancy and all that, and then you can figure it out. Some people really like that. Others don't. So that's definitely one reason why it might not have the success, because if you're looking for a complicated game, One Page Rules doesn't have that. Now, this was a year ago. And since this post, One Page Rules has definitely gotten much more complex, at least I think, especially with the new 3.5 rules, the beta rules being released. The game is adding more complexity. And as far as stats not being the same, I actually made a video back when the channel started comparing the two. And One Page Rules has a fair amount of the stats that 40K does. It just doesn't present them in a massive table or chart right up front. Instead, a lot of the stats that you expect to see in a 40K list or data card are baked in. So, for example, 40K units will have a speed statistic, how fast they can move. One Page Rules just says, well, everyone moves 6 unless stated otherwise. So that way you avoid having to put in unnecessary stats and data and just say, unless we tell you otherwise, this stat is the same for everybody. So it has it without having it. So simple and reductive. More so, yes, but that actually is part of the reason some people are attracted to One Page Rules, so it might cancel out a little bit here. Now let's go on. He also says the missing of flavor is a often mentioned point of OPR units and special rules, and many people cannot cope with the rules simply being a mechanical effect and not a whole flavor text, and having to do with the work of how it would look like themselves. Wow, that sentence needed some proofreading. I think I get his point, though, that the thing is, in One Page Rules, sometimes the rules just seem to be there to be there. They weren't there to kind of, to make the unit's background lore, fluff, and aesthetic appear on the tabletop. And that I can understand. If rules look like they're just there to try and fix holes, plug gaps, make the game function, you can only have so many of those before people start to get a little bit turned off. But with the 3.5 beta, that's exactly what the game is trying to address. And as I said in my videos going over each of those new Army special rules, in some cases I think they achieved it really, really well, and in other cases I think they missed the mark. But what that means is One Page Rules recognizes that's something players want. They want the rules to reflect the Army. When they're playing an Army, they want it to feel a certain way, and so the rules are starting to match. I totally agree with him that up until the 3.5 beta, a lot of the rules were so similar across armies, it felt more like you're playing different branches of the same army with different skins as your paint job. I mean, maybe that might be a bit of an over-exaggeration, but I think you get the point. So here, he has a good point. I just don't think the point is as big of a deal as he mentions. And then again, he was saying this a year ago. Now, this next point, I think, just catching the first sentence is a very valid one. OPR has no real physical store presence. It's primarily based on private 3D printing and giving other model systems to be used in. Okay, not much a store may be interested in supporting or advertising for, with other big companies having a big branch name that does a lot of work for them. Once again, I think I get what he's saying. We'll just stick with that first sentence. It has no physical presence. You walk in a store, you don't see the shelving, the space, the display or something like that with One Page Rule stuff on it. But you will see that next year. So I definitely agree that is important. The only way OPR has gotten around is by word of mouth. That's it. That's how I heard about it from someone else who played. And everybody who I brought into the game is because I said, hey, I have a game you should try. So it has been entirely based on the gaming community itself spreading, whereas other games have marketing budgets. They have advertising campaigns. They already have momentum behind other games or other IP or other products, and then they can bring in the game more easily. So think when Mantic brings in a new game, they already have some momentum from their other games, and they can say, hey, if you like this, give this a try, whereas One Page Rules is literally starting from scratch. But with Broken Truth coming out, or at least the campaign beginning in the end of September, you will start to see it appearing in stores, because one of the tiers of the Broken Truth campaign is for brick and mortar stores to buy in and get some starter packs and some additional box sets so that people who come in the store and are walking around, they'll see the bolt action, they'll see the Warhammer stuff, they'll see the historical stuff, and then they'll see one-page rules. And it'll be new. Folks who go into the same store over and over very quickly notice when something is new. They're there so much that just in their peripheral vision, they'll pick up a different color, a different shape, something brighter, something different and out of place, and then they'll go and take a look. And if the models look good, you can tell they'll pick the box off the shelf. And if the cover's enough to interest them, then they'll turn it over to the back and see, well, what's in this box? And that's when they might start asking other people in the store, hey, have you ever heard this? Does anyone in this store play this? So yeah, having no physical presence, I think, is a big reason why one-page rules is not as big as it probably could be. However, that is definitely going to change. So I'd be curious to see how the number of players and the size of the community is going to grow once the Kickstarter begins, but more importantly, once they start making their deliveries. I think they said it's March or May, one of the M months, in 2026, and you will start to see OPR products on shelves. So there's a couple reasons. I think some of them are valid, but some of them are already being addressed. All right, let's move on here. Heavily Bearded says, I would also add there's not 45 years of lore around one-page rules. Whether you like retcons, updates, and new creative directions or not, something like Warhammer has deep roots. Absolutely. 100%. One-page rules has been around for 10 years. Warhammer has been around for a lot longer, for around 45. Just the fact that it has that much time means you've got 2 and potentially 3 generations of players to pass it on to their kids, to their friends. Yeah, longevity is an essential reason why Warhammer is so darn big, because at one point, Warhammer was the tiny little game that nobody had ever heard of, and now it's huge. So, while that is a valid point, once again, look how fast One-Page Rules has grown in just 10 years. So let's fast forward another 10 years once Broken Truth comes out, once more people are able to play it, once they start partnering with other companies. They've now, you see battle reports on big websites like Mini Wargaming that have hundreds of thousands of viewers that might eventually start to check out some of these battle reports. And hopefully it'll carry the little guys like me along with it. You know, rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing. So that's very important. However, having said that, and this is something I may need to have another chat with one page more about, the lore that has made Warhammer so big is the lore that has made one-page rules. I mean, let's not deny it. OPR started as a knockoff of 40K, and if you look at it, all the factions are direct carryovers. And so what OPR is trying to do right now is kind of break away from that and go their own way. But at the same time, they're in quite a straitjacket. So yes, they have their Battle Brothers faction, and no, they're not Space Marines, they're just genetically enhanced humans with super advanced armor. But they're definitely not Space Marines. So there's only so much that one-page rules can do with the lore to make it unique without completely betraying the whole existing point of it. It started off as 40K lite. So that could, at the same time as it's one of the reasons OPR is not as big, it could be a detriment. Because if someone likes Warhammer and comes over, it could be a familiarity. Great, I already love the lore of 40K, and I can see how I could bring this into OPR. Or others will look at OPR and say, that's just a copy of 40K. If the only attraction is the rule set, it's not going to do as well. A rule set might attract someone to a game, but the lore, the world building, that's what will keep someone in a game, even if the rules start to go to crap, as we've seen with Warhammer. And then Morn Oakenshield says the One-Page Heresy would be a pretty good short audiobook. I was there the day the OPR slew Warhammer. Yeah, so that's the opening line of the entire Horus Heresy book series, which I'm very close to finishing, by the way. And yeah, it's funny, but I don't think One-Page Rules is going to slay Warhammer. It can become a very serious competitor, but I don't know if it will. I really don't think one day Games Workshop's going to put up a gone out of business sign and underneath it is going to say this lot purchased by One-Page Rules. I don't see that happening. Okay, I think we got time for one, maybe two more. Let's see what we got here. So Dave Pack says, agreed, well said, especially the last point regarding store presence. For me personally, I don't mind the sameness. as regardless of a similar effect, having 12 names, feel no pain, shield, repair, combat, drugs, medic, etc., having limited mechanics helps with balance. I do think a few more unit options here and there would be a good thing, but overall, really like OPR, and a few more properties could be useful for immersion, like an open-top vehicle tag, but pretty good game. So he has an interesting comeback there to the critique that simplicity in one-page rules is a bit of a turnoff. He says actually the simplicity is what makes it so balanced. I know personally when I started playing one-page rules, the first few games before I really knew what I was doing, and my opponent didn't know either, every single game almost came down to the last dice roll. There were no blowouts. There was no, by turn 2, you know who's going to win. We were amazed with how well the game seemed to balance itself. Now, after years of playing and having opponents who are also very familiar, I've had a few games that within the first couple turns, you're like, okay, this is already over. But with 40K, I just got used to that. By the end of turn 1 or 2, the game was decided, you were just playing it out. One-page rules is a lot more balanced. Now, with the release of the beta, the 3.5 beta, and introducing more complexity and special rules that are more mirroring the aesthetic of different armies, there is a chance the balance might get a little thrown off. So we won't know that until the beta's over and the final rules for 3.5 are put in there. But I still think he makes a valid point. And then we're going to leave on this note here. King God the Cheese. Okay. Look at the big brain, replies Sawblutt, but look at this one. Looking at the number of replies to the OP, it looks like this one plucked a nerve. So, we're going to take a look at some of those replies. We're going to see some of the critiques, we'll see some of the defenses, and we'll see what else folks have to say about why one-page rules is doing as well as it is, but isn't doing better. So already an interesting conversation about the things that make a game interesting, fascinating, what can bring players into a game, what can keep players in an existing game. So I'm excited to go through the rest of that post with you all and to see what kind of comments the community at large has. In the meantime, what do you think? What are the biggest reasons why you were gravitating to one-page rules? What are the reasons why those of you who played it and thought, well, it's not the greatest, but it's okay? What comments do you have? Where is one-page rules getting it right? Where is it getting it wrong? And how would you respond to that initial question, why hasn't one-page rules taken over the tabletop gaming world? Let me know what you think down below, and until next time, keep your dice on the table.